first question, we had a question from our friend named Sam, and he wanted to know why is the matzah bread called the bread of affliction? Isn't the matzah bread the bread that they used during redemption? Shouldn't it be called bread of redemption?
That's a good question. The truth is that the bread, the matzah bread that we eat, like everything else on Pesach night, represents two opposite qualities. You'll see that the entire structure of Pesach, everything that's done throughout the Seder, everything that's done throughout the entire night, is done with a sense of duality. There's a question and there's an answer. There's a child and there's a parent. There's foods that we eat that are bitter, and there's foods that we eat that are sweet. There's things that remind us of slavery, and there's the way we recline to remember freedom. The matzah itself, which is the most important food that we eat on Pesach today, has the quality of both aspects. It's both an element of lechem oini, which is that it has a bread of affliction. Oini comes from the word poor, and it also has a definition of lechem oini is that it's a bread that we say a lot of oinim l'dvarim harbi. We say a lot of things over it, which means it's the bread that we say the magid, the agad over it. Now, the reason why it's actually called bread of affliction is that there's an opinion by the Even Ezra, it's brought down by the Barbanel. Other sources bring this down, even though Maral writes against it, but we'll get to that in a moment, that they bring down that this bread, the matzah bread, is called bread of affliction because this was actually the bread that Klal Yisrael ate, the people of Israel ate when they were slaves. And the reason why they ate this bread when they were slaves is because this bread is basically very simple. It's a very simple ingredients. It's not anything complicated. You just need flour and water. And it also stays in the stomach for a longer period of time. It takes a longer time to digest. So the Even Ezra writes that this was probably the bread that they served the slaves. The Egyptians, as we know, historically, the Egyptians are the ones that created a way to create, a means to create bread. They were the first people to ferment and learn the art of creating bread. So the slave owners were eating bread, proper bread that was risen, and they fed their slaves this type of bread that was much more simple ingredients, and also ingredients that type of nourishment that lasts in the stomach for a longer period of time. Now, if you look in Maimonides, in the Rambam's version of the Agada, when we say Hey lachmani l'chalav son of Mitzrayim, this is the bread that we ate in Egypt. The Rambam writes in the beginning of that, we have the Rambam here. Bebihilu yatzanim Mitzrayim. We left in haste, leaving Egypt. In great haste, we left Egypt, and this was the bread that we ate in affliction, which means this is the bread that we ate as we were leaving Egypt. So this bread represents both. The Maharal writes something very, very deep and important. And he says like this, that the nature of this bread, what's the difference between a person that's free or a person that's enslaved? And enslaved can mean someone that's enslaved to another person, or slavery can mean some type of internal slavery, a person that's enslaved to their own emotions, a person's enslaved to his own instincts, a person that acts reactively. A person that's living in a state of slavery as an eved is someone that's contingent and dependent on other people. It means if a person's walking down the street and someone says, by the way, you're very smart, and therefore the person feels very good about themselves, this means that you're dependent on the other person for your sense of self. You think you're smart because another person told you you're smart. You think you're wonderful because another person told you you're wonderful. You think you're a good person because another person said this evaluation about you. That means you're dependent on another thing. The definition of a slave, a simple slave, means somebody that his life or her life is not their own, and they're dependent on their master, when they should get up, what they should do, etc. So a person that lives this way is somebody that's completely dependent on another person, on something that's outside the self. Says the Maharal that if you look at the ingredients of matzah is very simple, which means in order to create matzah, You need basic 2 ingredients. You need this flour and water. You don't need salt, you don't need honey, that's matzah shira, but basic lechem oini, basic simple bread of matzah, you don't need any other ingredients. You don't need eggs, which means that the difference between bread and matzah would be that matzah needs less ingredients and regular bread needs more ingredients. So one is more dependent on outside things like sugar or salt or honey or eggs in order to create it, and one is less dependent. So by definition, this matzah, which is actually also the bread of a slave, is also the bread of freedom, paradoxically. It's also the bread that allows us to be free. And the same thing also in time. If you say that in order for this bread to be a proper bread, it has to rise 18 minutes, and you have to give it time to rise, that means that it's dependent on time. You can't make it quickly, which means that it's a type of food that's dependent on something else. It's not only dependent on the ingredients, but it's also dependent on time. Matzah, precisely because it has less ingredients, it has less time, it's more free. So that's the paradoxical and the dual nature of matzah. On one hand, it's true. It's called lechem oini because maybe that was the bread that they ate in Egypt, or it's the bread that they ate when they were leaving Egypt. On the other hand, precisely that bread, which is lechem oini, is also the bread of freedom. And that's why we call matzah both lechem oini, broken bread, poor man's bread, and also the bread that brings us freedom.